Alright everyone, if you're watching this video, that means you probably asked me how I cook my ribs, so we're going to go through it. This is the 3-pack that I've been telling everyone about. You can get these at Sam's Club, $3.98 a pound right now. Sometimes you get it down to $2.99 a pound. Anyway, there's 3 racks of ribs here, and so what we'll do now is we'll cut them open, clean them under some water, and then come back and make sure that they're nice and square looking. You want to have them essentially an even cut of meat across the whole thing so that it cooks evenly. So anyway, I'll show you how to do that, and then I'll show you how to take off the membrane on the back right here as well, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so what we want to do here is the most important part of making ribs, or at least making them tender. On the back side of a rib is this membrane. I don't know how well you can see it, but it's pretty much just a white, thick layer of membrane. And so what we want to do is pull that off. There's a lot of different techniques. There's only one that I use because it seems to be the easiest. This is one that's already had it taken off, so I don't know if you can see the comparison between that and that. It looks like, anyway, we'll try and make this one look as good as that one. So what I use is some paper towel. Just dry paper towel is fine. I prefer to start at this end. For some reason it's a little harder to get a hold of this membrane back here. This one's sticking up pretty good, but usually easiest to start down here. You just kind of pick at it until you finally get a hold of it. You're not going to rip a bunch of meat off, so don't worry about that. You can get pretty rough with it. And then you're going to pull it off like that. So you can see the difference here between this and that now, I hope. And that's the look you're looking for right there. It's almost like there's a second membrane under it, but that's not going to be a problem when you're cooking your ribs. It's going to turn out just fine. You'll never know it's there. It's this guy right here that I'm pulling off that will cause you problems. You have the best ribs in the world, but it'll be nasty tough if you don't get that off. And then down here at the bottom, it seems like there's not a lot of membrane on the very tip of this, so just pull off any excess here, make sure there's no membrane, and then you're good to go. So that one looks like that, and that one looks like that. So we're good to go. Next step will be seasoning, and then we'll put them in the smoker. It's pretty easy like that. Now it's ready to be put the rub on it, and this is what I'm using. I don't know if you can see this. Grill Mates. I get it at Sam's Club, Applewood rub. It's my favorite, mostly because it stays sweet, not real spicy. My family doesn't like spicy, so we don't do spicy, unfortunately. I love spicy. And then I use olive oil. So you need very little. Some people use mustard. I use olive oil for this. I don't know why I do it. I just do it because I do. But what I was talking about earlier with trimming, sometimes this right here can be really just huge and fat. And so when you pack it down like this, sometimes it'll be flat like this, and then it'll have a big hump. And so you don't want it to be like that. You want to try and be as consistent and smooth as possible, just like this. So I'm going to start with the bottom first. Doesn't take much of this, just very little. I always put way too much on it every time because I don't have a squirt bottle. I'd like to keep that in a squirt bottle and be perfect, but I don't live in a perfect world, I guess. And I'm lazy, so I don't go get one. Alright, so you just need something to help bond this rub to it. And then with the rub, you want to be very generous. This is not a seasoning, so it's not as strong as a seasoning. If you did this with an actual seasoning, and not a rub, you would be completely overpowering this meat, and it really wouldn't be a good taste. So you got to make sure you're using rub, and then make sure that you're being very liberal with the seasoning on it, and then just kind of pat it in, rub it in as best you can. Alright, let's flip it over and do the other side. Dang it, got my hands dirty. I'll have to clean this off later. Again, I put way too much on there. Dang it. That's one of the advantages of doing mustard, is you can control it better if you don't have a better means of spreading it than I do. I guess you can use one of those baster brushes or whatever. Anyway, this works for me. You spread it all around, and load her up. I don't think you can put too much on there. Make sure you get plenty of this. If you're doing 3 racks, you need a good bottle. You'll pretty much go through every bit of at least 90% of it. On the sides here, make sure you get those. The edges. Just get it all best you can. Don't hold back. I like to do this 24 hours in advance. This morning I'm not. I'm doing it just as soon as I get done here. I'm going to throw it in the smoker. Alright, so that's all you do. It's got rub on it all over now. You can see it kind of turns that red color that people are expecting with ribs. Once it sets in, the juices pull out. A lot of these rubs have stuff in them that'll actually draw the juices out, which is good because then it coats this really nice. Alright, next up will be putting it in the smoker, and I'll kind of tell you what I do and the method I use when I smoke it. So here's my little smoker. It's from smoking it. I love it. So let's talk about wood real quick. This is my wood pan. Some of you have wood chips, and that's fine. My general recommendation is get roughly a fist size portion of wood. So anyway, something like this size right here, and use it for this amount of meat. Obviously, if you're doing more meat, you'll want to use more wood. So if you're using a chip smoker, then I recommend keep feeding it at least for the first hour until you get essentially the equivalent of a fist size full of wood. Alright, and then just set that in like so. Well, assuming mine will close here. That wood might be too big. Okay, and then as far as the meat's concerned, you can see it's already turning nice and red, getting juicy looking. I try to keep mine as far away from the heating element as possible. So I'm just going to put mine up on the high rack. And then I've got it set to 220 to 225. And so the general rule of thumb is 225 for 2 hours. On baby back ribs, it's 221. So 2 hours smoking, 2 hours wrapped, which I'll show you what we do here in a minute, and then an hour at the end with barbecue sauce, and just kind of tighten the meat up and cook the barbecue sauce in to kind of give it a glaze. What am I forgetting? I think that for the most part is it. What I do with baby backs for myself personally is I do 2 hours smoked, and I actually do 2.5 to 3 hours wrapped. And I do that because most people prefer to have their ribs a little bit more on the tender side. If you're doing competition style, then maybe you want to cut that back, but we're doing for in-laws and wives at this point. So 2, 3, 1 is about my method. 2, 2.5, 1. Just kind of have to fill it out based off of the rib meat that you've got. I prefer electric smokers. I can't say that. I have never used a propane or a charcoal or anything else like that. I can tell you that what I like about this is I can set it and I can leave it. With charcoal, I know you've got to manage the heat always. You got to be around it constantly. I've heard with propane that the temperature fluctuates quite a bit. This thing will keep the same temperature regardless of what time of year it is or what conditions it's in, and I don't even have to pay attention to it. I set it at 225 and I'm good to go. So we're going to let this set now and start smoking. I use cherry wood in here. I prefer cherry wood because I like to come out here and smell the smokestack just because it smells amazing. But apple's a good wood and cherry's a good wood. I'd probably stick with those two if you're doing ribs. That's what most people do anyway. Maybe some hickory. Alright, I think that's it for now. While your ribs are smoking for the first 2 hour period, you'll want to make up a little concoction. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay out some tin foil, and I'll show you this later, but we'll put the ribs on it, and then we're going to pour some liquid on it, because essentially what it's going to do is it's going to bake in liquid for those 2.5 to 3 hours that I was telling you about. So key ingredient is apple cider vinegar. This helps break down the meat and make it very tender. This is just for additional flavor if it does anything at all. What I usually do is apple cider vinegar and apple juice. This is apple raspberry. I'm going to put some ginger ale in there today. It really matters very little what you put in. I've used pineapple juice, orange juice, apple juice, and now this stuff. So key ingredient really is this stuff right here. I've known people to do just a juice. Obviously it's just getting juice into the meat. So that's going to be the key when you wrap them and cook them again for another 2.5 to 3 hours. So if you're doing this though, you want to make sure your parts are right. You don't want to put too much of this apple cider vinegar in there. Usually you'll do 2 parts juice, 1 part apple cider vinegar. And whatever measurements you want to use of it, I'm probably going to make too much. I always do. I also put some more seasoning in there as well. So I'll show you what I'm doing here. I'm just completely eyeing this. I have no idea what I'm doing really when it comes to this. You don't put a ton in the ribs, but at the same time I don't want to be short either. So I'll just make up what I think is proportionate rations of this. Put some rub in there. Again, just more flavor that it's going to cook in. Okay, so I need to go. I can tell you right now I'm going to have a ton of this stuff left over. Never use soda, so we'll see what happens. Okay, so that's pretty much your mixture. Some people prefer to warm this up before you put it on. I don't know what it does other than maybe helps it mix a little better. Put it on the stove and cook it a little bit. I just put it straight on like this. So I keep it stirred up when I'm pouring it on. I'll stir it a little bit as I go. You'll see that here when I pull out the ribs and do this next section. that's it. So just pull it out and put it in the fridge. Been 2 hours. Good smoke. And good looking ribs. So we've got the ribs here. Put one here in the camera. Make sure it's in there. Okay, it's been smoking for 2 hours, so here's the next step. What we're going to do is, it's best if you use squeezable butter, but I always forget to go grab some squeezed butter. It's just a lot easier to use, so I'm just going to use a cube of butter, and I'm going to use about a tablespoon of butter on each side. Again, this is more of an adhesive instead of than flavor. And it does obviously add a little bit of flavor to it, but rub it on there really nice like this. Make it as buttery as possible. Alright, well, that's not going to do any good. And I've got my brown sugar here. And brown sugar, again, very liberal, just like you did with the rub. Just more flavor that's going to cook in for the next 2 or 3 hours. It's not going to hurt it. Both sides, I don't know really why I do it on both sides, but nonetheless, I do. Just more seasoning and more flavor is all. Now while I'm doing this, one other thing that I'm doing here that you can see is I've actually laid out 6 pieces of tin foil, and this is the heavy duty, I don't know which brand it is, it's whatever the name brand stuff is. Any heavy duty tin foil will work. He is heavy duty, and then I also use the, what's the word I'm looking for? Double layer it. So put 2 pieces of it down per rib, because you just have sharp points on some of these ribs where the bones are sticking out, and it will poke through your tin foil in a heartbeat. And that's counterproductive, because what you're trying to do is trying to keep as much moisture in this tin foil as you possibly can. So with that in mind, do everything possible to make sure that you don't poke holes in it. One of the things that you do too is you want to clean your smoking grates that you had these on, those wire grates you have in your smoker, because what will happen is there's a lot of juice and meat that come off the bone when you're smoking it for the first 2 hours, and it hardens up on the grate itself, and so you need to go and you can clean all that off, because what will happen is you'll put this back on your grate, and then the grate has hardened pieces of meat and grease that then poke up through your tin foil. So make sure that you avoid holes at all costs. Not that it's going to ruin whatever you're doing, but it definitely lets moisture out and it's not going to be as effective in the end. Alright, enough of that. So here's the next thing you want to do. So what I do is I kind of create like a little bowl out of my tin foil. And the reason I'm doing this is because I don't want the juice to flow out at any point. And then stir this up a little bit. And then I'm going to pour this in here. You just kind of pour it on the back side of the meat. And then put a little bit in the bottom of it so that it can continue to cook in it. Now, one of the key things on this is also to make sure that the meat is down and the bones are up. Meat down, bones up. When you're smoking it, you do it like this, and then all the fat juices go down into the meat while it's smoking. But when you're doing this, you want as much meat in the juice as possible, so you want to bring it down and leave it in there like that. Alright, so what I need to do now is I need to show you how much juice I put in here, just to give you a frame of reference. You're probably putting, I don't know, definitely less than 1/4 of an inch of juice in the bottom here. Let me grab the phone here. Okay, you see that? It's not much at all. Just want to give a layer of it here, a little less than 1/4 of an inch. And then once you do that, we'll wrap it up. And you want to wrap it up in such a way that the juice isn't going to come out. Again, that's your number one objective here. So, however you want to do it. I've seen it done a million different ways. I don't know which one's the best. Because no matter what you do, it seems like juice is always going to run out at some point. You just try to minimize that as much as possible. Alright, now I've got juice coming out the backside already. And be careful when you're tightening this up that you don't tighten it up too much. These corners are really where you're going to poke holes in it. This one doesn't have any sharp bones on it. Too bad, but some of these others will. Okay, so alright, and that's all you do. The juice is down there, you can kind of fill it at the bottom. At this point, you put this back in the smoker or in the oven. It's all the same in the end because you're not putting any more flavor on it, it's just baking at this point. So you throw it back in. I'm going to do this at 250. I bump the temperature up. I'm going to do it for about 2.5 to 3 hours. It just depends on how anxious I get in the end, really. To pull it out. You're not going to make it too tender. That's just not going to happen. So I'm going to bump it up 250, put it back in the smoker, and then we'll go from there. But that's pretty much this step. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. As you can tell, I use very little of this juice. I'm going to have a ton of it left. All right. Alright, here we are. They've been in there for 3 hours at 250, and I actually put these in my oven because I had some other ribs cooking in the smoker. So, at this point, when you open it up, I don't know how much you can see of this. Let me open up this one. Open it up slowly. Let it cool down just a hair because it's almost impossible to handle them. They're so stinking hot. Look at all that juice. You see that? There's a ton of juice in there.
It's pretty dark, you can tell that's all juice in there. Alright, so what happens now is I'm going to pull them all out. I'm going to put barbecue sauce on them, and then we're going to put them back in the oven for about an hour, or the smoker, whichever one. And we're almost there. These are our ribs pulled out of the juice. Tinfoil has been moved over here. Just use a little basting brush. I use Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce on everything. Well, as you can see, it's a big bottle, so I ended up using it for a long time. But you want to generously coat it. Now, I don't get crazy with it like I do the brown sugar and the rub, but I do try to put a pretty good healthy coating of barbecue sauce all over it. This adds the final touch. One of the things I found, we've done a lot of different contests when we've cooked them at work and with friends and stuff. I found that in the end, you really can't tell one flavor from the other. It's been my experience. I could be wrong, but some people swear differently. Truth of the matter is, if you follow this up to this point, you've done everything I've done, your ribs are going to be amazing, and there isn't going to be a soul that will complain about the flavor. Really, about the only thing you can do with the ribs to change their flavor is to add some heat to them, which this is about as low heat as it possibly can get. You can get rubs that are quite hot. You can get barbecue sauces that are pretty spicy. Again, because of my family, we don't do spicy, or else I would otherwise. But for me, this is a good sweet combo. It has a nice little bold taste to it, so it's a little bit of kick, but not much at all. Just enough to satisfy you. So that's a pretty good amount. I'm gonna put a little bit more barbecue sauce on that one. Anyways, yeah, I'm just doing it. Just get it on all sides of it. I don't put it on the bottom. I just don't think it's necessary. There's no meat down there. Just put it up here on the top. Makes it nice and clean as well. And then what I'll do is when I get done with this, I'm going to put it back in my smoker, and I'm going to cook this at 225 for an hour. Now sometimes, well, not sometimes, you just don't have to go for an hour. You can go for 30 minutes, you can go for 45 minutes. Just depends on how tender these are, how anxious you are to eat, how close you are to your deadline to feed everybody. At this point, I mean, they were cooked after the first 2 hours, but at this point they're not going to get any more tender. If anything, what happens when you throw them back in the smoker is it actually tightens the meat up. So sometimes they'll come out and they'll be just super tender. Feel like then they're literally falling off the bone. You put them back inside the smoker for 30-45 minutes, an hour, and miraculously they tighten right back up, which is kind of interesting, but makes for great presentation and very tender meat that sticks to the bone but still yet tender. This is pretty much it. I'll show you the final product as soon as it comes out here in about an hour. I'm going to go ahead and finish barbecuing these up, but other than that, there's nothing special. I think I told you, but it's 225 is what I put them back on in the smoker for an hour. Okay, we're done. Time to cut them open and take a look at them real quick. In-laws are here. Wife is hungry. Of course, I'm starving. So this is what they look like when they're all said and done. It's a beautiful piece of meat, and they're hot as can be. They say on average, people eat about 3 ribs. So 1, 2, 3. In case you're trying to plan for a big group. and how many ribs you need. Total cook time on these, so you got 2, 3, 1 if you use my method. So that's what, 5-6 hours, and then I would add an extra hour in there just for prep time, to put the barbecue sauce on it, to season it, to pull in the membranes and everything else you saw in the video. Add at least another hour. Some of that can fluctuate. If you want to extend it out, you can, or shorten it up, you can. But for the most part, this is it. So I'll go ahead and cut this guy here, give you an idea of what it looks like. But that's it. So now it's time to eat. Good luck.